All right, you guys, I'm back. Really sorry about that. You guys let me know when you guys start jumping in to the new restarted one. What's up, Jesse? Will you guys let me know what's the last thing you guys heard me talking about here so I can recap it? What's up? 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 I really apologize. I went out there to see if there's like some kind of internet issue happening inside of what I need is to get like a mesh router, I think, to extend because unfortunately the box, like my modem has to be in a different room because I don't have a hookup here. Brian said quick question. Okay, Ethan said the templates. That's where Ethan remembers. The points when the deadlines come up. Okay, templates. The video for the compositing and title After Effects. Okay. When I said that, we'll go over something in class. Yeah, in the live stream. Yeah, this is class. The live stream is class. So when I say we go over stuff in class, it means in the live stream. Because I don't work on campus. I work remotely. Both jobs I work remotely. So okay, real quick. Again, this is kind of perfect. I guess this crap is happening today because we're not going to get to the other thing. So, to the Cinema 4D ball today, anyways, we're going to really just be working. Today, we're going to be really doing everything in here. And then Thursday, we'll do the rest of this stuff. But, if we have issues like this again, I extend deadlines and stuff, but I'll let you guys know. I'm also going to have to leave an announcement. Actually, let me write that down. In about the live stream issues. Also, I apologize. I keep coughing. I know Maria asked me if I was okay. Yes, I'm okay. I have asthma. And I usually hike during my lunches. I live close to a few hiking trails, so I go hiking during my lunch. And today was just rough. It was rough on my asthma. It happens. I'm a wheezy kid. I'm a nerd. So I've got glasses. I have asthma. I have ADHD. I have all the qualifications. Yeah, the ball, it can bounce more than that, but really just it has to bounce at least 4 times. I want to see 4 bounces so I can see that your loop is consistent. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But yeah, go ahead and start by downloading. I think I already downloaded this one. Let me just double check. Yeah. You can download this one right now, the After Effects ball template one. You can download the Cinema 4D ball template one and set that up. But yeah, we're going to start with templates for the After Effects and Cinema 4D ones, and then Adobe Animate is going to start off by itself. And then we will do the compositing and titles likely on Thursday. And if we don't get to that, I will just tell you guys to watch this one later, or I will create a new video for you. And then this are the parameters of the deliverable for me. So yes, repeat the bounce of each ball at least 4 times. It can be a little bit more than that, but shouldn't be less than that. And then it should have a title that fades in and out. And then if you guys want to look for what I am looking for within the ball bounces, right here is the what do you call this? The rubric that I have set up here so you guys can see how I'm going to look at it and grade everything for you guys. So, yeah, the asthma stuff sucks. My asthma gets worse in the winter time, but when it's dusty and when I take hikes outside, sometimes it does that. So, all right, let's get started inside of After Effects because that's why we're here, right? That's why you guys pay for class, right? Is to get started with actually doing things. So, here is the class folder that I have set up for you guys. I normally have my GCC one. You'll see me guys going into this one, but this is my class folder I have set up. And we're going to start by starting from the ground up, right? We're going to build this file and do it correctly. And so I have this template folder downloaded, which I gave all of you guys to do. These test ones, I can go ahead and create a new folder inside of my school one that I put test projects, and I can grab wrong one, grab these ones that I showed you guys last time and put that in there so that I can just easily have just a place for them to go. And so there's not a bunch of random project files happening here. And I'm going to go ahead and just select Control C, Control V, copy paste this folder right here. And then the one that says copy, I'm going to actually, let me do this first. Let's unzip this folder because what happens is when you download a zipped folder and extract everything, and I have had students who don't know how to unzip a folder. When you have a compressed folder that ends in .zip, you just right click on it and you go to extract all right here. Oh, I guess it doesn't zoom in there, but yeah, extract all, which is right here. And it will essentially unzip that folder for you. And so now I can throw the zipped one away. And now when I open this up, it's going to have another folder that says template folder, rename, and then finally going into the rest of the stuff. Well, I'm just going to drag this one and drop it into the main folder here so that I don't have to go into it twice. And so that's this one right here. If I open this up, it's now empty, so I can delete that. It just kind of like duplicates it for some reason. So now when I double click on here, it gets me to where I need to go. And so this is the one that I'm just going to Control C, Control V to copy and paste. And the one that says copy, I'm just going to click here. And I'm going to change this to 1_ bouncing balls. Right there, right? And so now I know what project this is right away. When I go into this folder and look for it, I can easily have all of my folders not only numerically ordered, right? But then also have a title there. So I'm not trying to find all my stuff. And this way, all of your assets are within these folders. And you don't want to save things to your desktop or to your downloads thing and save them there or work from them there. You want to save them in a main folder so that none of your assets end up like your images or anything that you put in your projects end up like kind of in weird spaces, because if that gets moved or if you move your project file, it disconnects. There's like a link that happens between the project file and the assets, and it disconnects between that. Yes, we're going to be using the bouncing ball template for After Effects, correct. And so I'm going to open this up and I am going to find that bouncing ball template that I downloaded, which is going to be in my downloads folder. And I'm going to unzip this real quick. Extract all. This is what pops up. I'm going to say extract. And then I'm going to delete the zipped folder. And then I'm going to hit Control X to cut and go back into my main folder over here where it says bouncy balls and go into the After Effects folder, and I'm going to paste this right here. And so now, in fact, I'm just going to drag this one because again, whenever you zip things, it duplicates it. Drag this one out this way, go in here, delete this one. There we go. And now when I go in here, you can see there's an After Effects project file right here. And I'm going to go ahead and open this project file. Grr. This is making me so frustrated. I'm just going to wait. All right. Shouldn't be unfrozen again. I'm just going to wait until you guys say that I'm not frozen. We're going to keep going. I'm sorry. I'm going to try and muscle through this today. We're going to at least get one of these done. And then we're going to get one done. I swear. Here's something that you guys will run into too. Let's see. How do you create a new folder? So you right click inside of your folders. Like, let's see here. So I have my GCC folder up here with my spring one. If you don't have the template downloaded from the file structure, module, right? Because you can get that through this module right here and download it into your main thing. You right click like in an open area in your file, and you go to new and then folder. And if you do that, you should be able to create a new folder. The stuttering passed a little while ago. Okay. Maria, what do you mean you cannot open it? What happens? You have to make sure you unzip the file first. Because you can't just double click into a zip file and start working in it because it's compressed. All right, let me bring this back down. All right. So when you initially get the project, we'll go into the After Effects one where I have it saved. So you kind of opened it. Yeah. So when you download it, it'll have a zip thing after it. You need to unzip the folder. And then you can, through the unzipped one, you'll be able to access this one right here. And when you open it, what's going to happen is up here at the top, it's going to have a little bit of an extra part of the file here that says converted, right? And so what happened, right, was I hit Control S to save my project, and it wanted to save it as a new project. And that is actually perfectly fine because you guys should save it as, you guys should save it with your own name, right? And so it does that. The Adobe will do that whenever there's been an update to the program and the files from a previous version of that program. So let's say this was from early 2023 when I created this template. And now we're in early 2024. And between those times, there's been updates to Adobe After Effects. It's going to want to make sure that those updates just are made to this file if needed, or that we're using the appropriate version. And so all you got to do is hit save. In fact, I'll rename this to, let's see, AE Bouncing Ball. And I'll put my last name at the beginning, Makara _ AE Bouncing Ball. Right. And then I'll save it like that. I'll save my project. So now, here's the name of my project that I'm actually working in, and it will have everything within the template for you guys. How do you unzip it? Okay, so you have a folder that is zipped. Let me just do this real quick. I think the downloads I had it in. Like this folder right here is zipped. If I look at it, it says .zip after it. You just right click on that, and then you go to, well, come on now. Really? Gosh, today's been interesting to say the least. That's all I can say. When you right click, you'll see this option that says extract all. And you should be able to extract it. Yes, correct. Thank you, Ethan. And then what will happen is when you do that, extract all, you'll get this little box that pops up. You'll hit extract down here. And then what it does is it opens it without that .zip extension at the end. And so that you'll be able to open this one now. This is the one you're going to want to save and work from. And this one you can just toss away if you don't need it. And so that's how you do. You can unzip the template. I would just follow along first with everything, and then I would worry about the template and stuff later. Then you can copy the file and paste it into your folder. Correct. That's what yep, correct. Ethan's correct. So when I open up this template, you're going to notice over here, I've already got stuff inside of my project file. And then it already opens up in our graph editor view. I'm going to just close that graph editor view for a minute because we're going to block out the animation. And blocking out the animation is basically laying those keyframes down that are linear first so that we get like this basic motion. And then we go in and fine tune it by easing those keyframes like we talked about last week. And so when blocking out the animation, I like to work in the dope sheet view. Remember, this is the dope sheet view, not the graph editor view. And then in order to fine tune those keyframes is when we'll jump into the graph editor view. And so the first thing that I want to look at is up here, I have a composition that says AE bouncing ball template. I think I'm going to rename that just to AE ball main. You guys don't have to, but this will help me keep track of this because what I'm likely going to do is incorporate the other bouncing balls that we create into this project here. And so I might have a bigger folder, right, that has that. I'm going to create another folder here that says underscore comps so I can put my compositions into that folder here. And then I'm going to create another folder, just clean housekeeping, right, that says assets. In fact, I'll do it capital assets. And I'm going to drag that ball image that you see here, this PNG. I'm just going to drag that into the assets folder so that everything kind of looks cleaned up. It's all in folders here, like a nice filing cabinet. And so I have my main composition open down here. The first thing that I want to do is let's check to make sure that composition is 1920 by 1080 and at 24 frames a second. And so the first thing I'm going to do is hit Control K as in kite on my keyboard or kangaroo. And let's go ahead and look at this. So I have 1920 by 1080, which looks good. The aspect ratio looks good. And I've got 24 frames a second. Perfect. 2-second duration is probably going to be pretty fast for what we're doing. So let's increase that to maybe 5 seconds here. And I'm going to hit OK. And so now if I go down to the bottom here, to those little mountains where you can zoom in and out of your timeline, I'm just going to grab this little button, just drag it all the way to the left, which allows me to see my entire timeline reaches from 0 to 5 seconds total. Maria, you can jump back to that in a little bit, but you're going to want to copy and paste like the template into your main project folder. You're going to want to make a project folder, and then the template that you downloaded for After Effects is where you're going to want to copy and paste that. You're going to want to copy and paste the template into your main project folder, right? And so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to grab that ball, that After Effects bouncing ball. I'm going to drag that into my composition here. And when we look at it, if I zoom in here, it kind of looks a little fuzzy around the edges right here. And there's a reason for that. The image itself is actually not fuzzy. It's pretty sharp. But because down here, So what does half mean when I'm looking at that? Half means that this is the resolution playback that we're dealing with inside of After Effects. Um, extract, definitely extract it. Thanks, Ethan, for helping her out. Um, the resolution playback speed is at half right now, so it's dropping the resolution so that the when you go to play back your animation, it plays back smoothly. So some students who might not have a powerful computer, and when they go to hit the space bar to play their animation, it's going to chug. It's going to kind of like look jittery, right? Like it's kind of freezing, like it's freezing. And if that's happening, you just want to come over here and drop the resolution down. So normally it's at, normally you would have it at full, but you can drop it down to half, third, or quarter right here. You can also add it on to auto, so it will automatically do that itself. But so when you're seeing something, you're like, hey, I know this object should be sharp. It's a vector object. Why does it look kind of pixelated, right? And that's because our resolution is dropped down. So this might be the first place to look. And so I'm just going to turn that resolution from half to full because my computer can fortunately take, this type of work. And I usually don't have any issues with playback speed. Sometimes I do, but like I said, if I start to do that, then I will drop that down to half or a third. But in the meantime, this should work just fine using full resolution for me. But if you guys are having the issue with it, then just drop that resolution size down. It should start off in the template with half resolution. So if you want it to be like full resolution, you can change that back. The thing is this does not affect right here, does not affect your render. It's just what you're seeing inside of the program when you're playing it back. And so even if this is at a half or a third or a quarter, and it looks like this right now, when I go to render this out, it will look nice and crisp. So you don't have to worry about changing this back. You can just change it back whenever you want to. It's not going to affect the final output. And so the first thing that we want to do, let's add a background into here. So I'm going to right click and go to new solid. And I'm going to pick a new background color. Let's pick kind of like let's pick an off black. And I'm going to hit OK there. And then I'm going to drop this below. Remember, layer order over here in the timeline. Layer order matters. So I had to drop this down below the ball so that we could see the ball. And let me go ahead. Let's create a floor for this ball to bounce off of. Because if we look at this, if we come back here and we go back to the bouncing ball project and we look specifically at the After Effects one, we have a floor that the ball is bouncing off of. And so let's create that floor first so we can have like some kind of point where it stops. And so the next thing I want to do, there's a couple different ways that you can create the floor. You can create a solid object, another solid like layer and do that. Or you can create a shape and put a shape that goes all the way across the bottom if you want an entire floor. But the problem is that when we go to bring in these other projects that we create, like the Adobe Animate ball and the Cinema 4D ball, that is, if we do use a shape here, like an object shape, it's going to interfere with the other balls that we create. And so we want one just to kind of show beneath this ball specifically. And that's why we're going to use the technique of using a solid layer. So I'm going to go, you can either go back here and go to new solid, or you can do what I did before down at the timeline. You can right click and go to new and add a new solid. And let's change the color of this solid to something a little bit more, just like a different color. Maybe like a lighter green is kind of cool here. We'll stick to like greens and taupes, kind of like a camouflage military color. I guess it's kind of bright, but it won't be in a minute here. And I'm going to bring that below, drop that below there. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit P on my keyboard. Remember those properties, the transform properties that we have. The P, the shortcut for position is P. And I'm going to bring this down on my Y value to kind of be down maybe right about here. I round numbers are nice, so maybe I'll type in 1400 here so that I've got a nice even number to stop at. And we are going to do something called masking. We did this in the beginning class when we masked out that dude's head to add to that bird or chaos monster that we created the first like week of class, and we're going to use the same thing here in order to kind of mask this floor out so that it's only showing underneath the ball here. And so I'm going to go up here and grab my pen tool, which is shortcut G for girl. You can use either one, but I suggest getting used to shortcuts because shortcuts will make your workflow a lot faster. That's okay, Maria. Don't worry about falling behind. It was just worry about watching first and then, taking notes and then going in and doing it. I think that'll be easier for you. But let's go ahead and draw like a triangle shape under this ball here, because when we look back at this, it's kind of like this rounded triangular shape. And so I'm just going to kind of click here, and then click back here. And when I do that, you notice that it's, again, kind of hiding everything else that's outside of this mask. And I do want to point out that when you guys are making masks, right, you have to be selected on the layer that you want to add the mask to. So before I started drawing with that pen tool, I made sure that I was selected on this layer that I wanted to add the mask to. And now I've got like this triangular shape, and I can kind of move this around to maybe be centered with the ball. Let's check to make sure that ball is centered. In fact, I'm going to hit P on my keyboard, and it says 960 by 540, which is the center of our composition. If I want to turn on some guides, I can again go right here and click on the title action safe, which will turn on these guides. Again, these don't show up in your render, but it allows you to just kind of see where things are in my composition, right? And help me to just make sure things are within these squares. You really don't want to move things beyond these squares, because these are the aspect ratios that we talked about earlier. I know I was telling you guys modern screens are usually 16 by 9 aspect ratio, which is this outside square right here. And this inside square that you see is actually a 4 by 3 aspect ratio, which would have been used for old televisions. And so that's why the title action safe is set up like this. It's these different squares represent different screen aspect ratios. And so that's just good to know in the back of your mind. But because we have like the outside square to work with, we can kind of move things within that area, right? But it's a good rule to stay within that zone. But I'm going to go over here. And so I noticed that when I look like right at here, I'm not exactly centered with my ball. And so with my pen tool selected, I'm going to go and grab these little corners of the mask that I created and just kind of move that over. So I'm going to grab that and move that centered. And then I'm going to grab these. If I click one and hold down shift, I can grab the other one. And then holding down shift, I can kind of move it a little bit further there. Maybe this one's a little bit too far away from this one. Like they're not exactly the same length. So I'm just going to select that, and using my arrow keys on my keyboard, I'm just going to move it over. Because you can use, if you use your arrow keys when you're selected on something, you can move things up or down in increments of like 1 pixel, right? I'm actually going to shut my camera off so that maybe that'll help with the streaming as well. And also, you guys can focus on this. One of the things that we did notice when we look at the floor back in our thing is that there's like a smooth transition that's happening here. It's not like there's a hard section right up here where the floor like is, but this area right here is kind of faded out, and that's called feathering. And with masks, you have the option to feather your edges. And so what you do is each one of these little you see these little arrows right here. These are drop down menus, right? So if you see these on a layer, it means there's something below it that we can access. And I'm going to click that one on the mask right there. And it's going to give me it's going to roll back down to the exact mask, because this is like a folder, like a little folder, because you can have multiple masks on one single object, but right now we're just working with one. And when I unfurl this, you notice that there's path option, which is the path that we have drawn, right? There's a feather option, which is what we're going to increase to feather out and smooth out and kind of taper out that shape. There's an opacity, which we can change the opacity of everything within that mask. And then there's an expansion here. And when you click the expansion, it allows essentially the what is viewed to go beyond the shape of your mask. And sometimes you might need to do that just to adjust it a little bit more. So we might need to do that after we feather it, but I'm just going to increase the feather here. And it gives us, like, when I click off, it gives us this nice smooth kind of rounded area around here, but this nice hard line for my actual ball to bounce off of. And that's all we need to do for the floor. But I am going to click on that layer and hit enter on my keyboard to rename this to floor object, right? So that I know that when I need to go, say, if I need to select this floor to move it, I can just click on that layer right there. I'm going to lock these two objects here so I don't accidentally move them. In order to lock layers, you just click, right here's the padlock option. You just click these little boxes next to the layers you want to lock. And that just makes it so I can't accidentally click and drag these items around. Like if I click and drag that, it's going to drag my ball around, but I can't accidentally grab onto that floor and move it. Everything's locked there for me. All right, now let's get to some fun stuff, okay? Because we have worked really hard to get here today. We have gone through all sorts of thick and thin craziness, and I'm so happy you guys are sticking with me because it was rough. I know it was. I apologize. I can't control my internet doing this stupid crap, but here we are. We're at the fun stuff. So the first thing that we want to do before we start animating, does anyone in the chat know what we want to do first? I'm going to ask these questions so you guys can start to remember it. It was something that we talked about last week, that you want to move on your object to initiate where that motion is coming from, right? To tell our program and to tell this layer, I want the motion to come from this specific spot. Do you guys remember what that's called? You're on the black screen. It's okay, Maria. You'll catch up. It's okay. It starts with an A. I'll give you guys 10 more seconds. I'll count down. 10, 9. I'm going to see things popping up right after I say it too. I guarantee. Yeah, dude, you're right. Hell yeah. Way to go. That is awesome, Efren. Got it. Anchor point. So the anchor point tool. Again, you can either select the anchor point tool up here, or you can hit Y on your keyboard, and that will bring up your anchor point tool. It looks like this little box, right? And so we're going to grab this anchor point, and holding down shift, I want to move this to the bottom of the ball. I want the bottom of the ball to be driving that squash and stretch, right? I'm thinking ahead, right? I'm not going to make this ball not only go up and down, I want it to bounce up and down, but I also want to add, thinking of those principles of animation, that squash and stretch there in order to give this ball some kind of like life, right? We can do two, one without it and one with. We'll just do like a side by side. I'll show you guys how to do that too. And you'll see which one looks better and why. But we want to move that anchor point down to the bottom of the ball so that this is the area where all of the motion is driven from. Label everything. That's a good one, Pierre. Yes. I mean, you should label everything. That is smart. Yeah, that is your number one. Label things. I'm happy you guys are thinking of that too. So I've got the anchor point moved to the bottom. And the first thing that we want to do after we've moved the anchor point is we want to kind of move this ball up. Let's have it start from right here at the top of the screen. Maybe even right up here. We could go to that first line, right? So we're going to move the ball until the top of the ball is meeting that first line up here. And I'm going to come up here and grab my selection tool, which is also V for Victor on your keyboard. And when we make this ball bounce, if we look back at this GIF, it's only bouncing on the Y value, right? It's not going side to side. It's only going up and down. So when we're working with an individual parameter of property, specifically the transform, only really the transform or the position property and the scale property have the ability to really do this, right? Is to right click and separate the dimensions. And so that just allows, again, us to separate the X from the Y position so we can focus on one or the other. It's good habit to get into this, unless we're doing kind of complex motions, which at that point you can keep these locked together. You can always right click and just unclick that option there to unseparate the dimensions, but we're going to work with just the Y position specifically on this animation here. And so I'm going to make sure that my playhead is at the beginning of my timeline. And I'm going to record by pressing the little stopwatch here. I'm going to keyframe that position up here at the top. In fact, I'm going to just type in a pretty standard 240 because it was 240.0 something, all sorts of crazy numbers after. But let's just make it an even number, something that we can remember. And then I'm going to select this layer and I'm going to hit U on my keyboard, which is going to just kind of shut off anything else that we're not using and only show the parameters that we have keyframed. So if you're ever, again, I mentioned this last week, but if you guys have a bunch of keyframes on a layer and you just want to see those and not all this other stuff that ends up with it, like, you can open it and see all this other stuff here. You just select the layer and you hit U for umbrella on your keyboard and it'll just bring up the layers with the keyframes on it. And so we're going to block this animation out. We're going to start up at the top and let's move ahead 12 keyframes. And then we're going to bring this ball all the way down. We're going to change the value here until this ball is touching the floor, maybe a little bit past the floor. In fact, that value, I'm just going to type 875. So it's a nice even value there. And then we want this ball to bounce back up, right? But we want it to bounce back up into the same, I think this one is always the same. Let's just double check here. Yeah, perfect. It's like an infinite looping bounce. And so in order to create a loop, here's like a side thing. We're going to start talking about loops, right? A loop. A loop is an animation that the beginning and the ending are exactly the same. And so it looks seamless. It's something that you can watch over and over and over again, and you can't tell where the beginning or the end is, right? So that bouncing ball, the After Effects one was a loop, right? A looping animation. So this one is really important to write down. So the beginning and ending keyframes must be the exact same value. Very, very important in making a looping animation. If the keyframes at the beginning and the end of the cycle, right? We're doing a cycle. The ball went down, it's going to hit the ground and it's going to bounce back up into the same position. If that bounce back up to the top is not the same value as the first keyframe that we put down, you will have a hitch. And I will show you what this looks like. So if I were to now bring this, if I were to shorten my timeline like this, the playing area, if you want to shorten the playing area of your timeline, you can hit, this is just a quick tip for you guys. So to shorten timeline playback area, you will hit the keys N as in Nancy or B. Oh. If you hit N or B, it will either change where the end of your timeline is or the beginning of your timeline, the playback is. So this, it determines where the playhead plays back from. So if I play here, notice what's happening when I hit play, when I hit space on my keyboard, and it's playing just this little section here that I have kind of highlighted. You can grab and you can move this area around. It's called your work area on your timeline. But if I wanted it to be at the beginning, I could just hit B. I could move my playhead to the beginning of the timeline there, wherever I want it, and hit B for beginning. And then wherever I want it to end, I'll just hit N on my keyboard, and that'll just kind of shorten or extend the length of that. Now make sure that when you render that this is all the way to the end if you want to render the entire timeline, because this is affected by your render settings, right? So if you only have it to here and you go to render your video later, it will only do this section of your timeline and not the entire timeline. So just make sure you guys note that when you're doing this, okay? But to get this loop, what we're going to do is we're going to take this ball and we're going to drag this back up. So we're going to change the values, drop the value down, and you can just click and drag these, right, to bring this value back up. But if you notice, the value here is 334. And remember that value at the beginning was 240. So now if I play it, what's going to happen is that ball is going to have like a jump in the animation. Versus if this value keyframe, if the last keyframe was the same exact value as the first one, it's going to look like a seamless loop. So I'm just going to move my playhead back to this keyframe here, and I'm going to delete that keyframe. And then I'm going to grab this first keyframe, select it like that, hit Control C and Control V, and copy it to this other section at the 1 second mark on my timeline. Okay. I'm going to drag this in just a little bit here. And so now when I play, the ball stops and starts at the exact same spot, right? It goes to the exact same spot at the top and the exact same spot when it comes back. At the beginning when it drops, and then up at the top there. There's a little bit of a stop because we've got some extra frames playing here. But if I were to bring this all the way to here and then play it, it's going to look pretty seamless, right? But the motion isn't right of this ball. If we just left it like this is blocked out, right? And if we just left it like this, though, it doesn't look right. Oh, the chat's delayed. Oh, nor my stream. Okay. Your stream's a little behind. These keyframes are linear keyframes, right? And so we need to change this in order for us to have the motion appear that this ball is accelerating down to the ground and then decelerating on the way back up. Because when you bounce a ball, right, when you slam it down to the ground, it's going to go really fast and it's going to hit that ground fast, and then it's going to decelerate on its way up. It's going to slow down as it's going up because gravity is pushing against it, right? And so that ball should go fast to the ground. It's going to hit that ground and then it's going to bounce up and slow back down into position. And so we're going to select all of these keyframes. And in order to get that acceleration and deceleration, we have to work with easing. And so the first thing I'm going to do is hit F9 on my keyboard, or you can also right click those keyframes, go to Keyframe Assistant, and just go to Easy Ease in case you guys don't have the F9 option on your keyboard. And we will get the change in the keyframes. Remember, they go from little diamonds, which are linear keyframes, to hourglasses, which are the eased ones. And we're going to go into our graph editor here. And there's nothing here because we don't have our position property selected. So I'm going to grab that Y position. And right away now you see this graph. I'm going to right click and make sure that we're in the value graph right now. Remember, we talked about the speed graph, which shows speed over time, and the value graph, which is going to show the value, right? Pixel changes or the position changes over the time, right? And so we're going to start in the value graph. And the cool thing when it comes to a bounce is that the graph is essentially going to emulate the look. If you were to see a ball bounce, if you were to bounce a ball across the room and that ball were to have a trail behind it that showed up when it bounced, and it creates kind of like an M, right? Like a rounded kind of hills looking. We're going to create that shape within this graph here to show the accelerating down to the ground, right? This is the ground keyframe. If I move my playhead over to this keyframe right here, this one, I can see that that's the keyframe that's down here on the ground, because the value, if we're looking at the graph, right here, is going to be 875 pixels on the Y position. And this one down here is going to be the 240 pixels on the Y position. Again, when you're looking at the value graph, it's flipped, it's mirrored. So 240 pixels is up here and the 875 is down here, right? It's just mirrored down here in the graph. That's something that is going to take your guys' brains a little bit of getting used to. But we're going to update the easing in here, and then we're going to look in the speed graph to see what the speed graph looks like. And so I'm going to grab this Bezier handle right here, and I'm going to drag this down this way. I'm going to bring it down here. I'm going to drag it down to kind of make this curve look really accentuated. And I'm going to grab the other side and do the same thing. I'm trying to line up those Bezier handles at about the same height here, so we get the same kind of acceleration and deceleration. So when the ball's going down to the ground, it's at about the same speed as it is coming back up. And then I'm going to grab these Bezier handles here where the ball's at the top of the bounce. And I'm going to drag this out. And I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to grab this one and drag this out, trying to make sure that the curves are matched up from one half of the curve to the other half of the curve. Yeah, like an upside down V. Yeah, correct. Like this. All right. Or like an upside down bird. And so what's going to happen is now when I play it, that ball's going to speed up really fast towards the ground. It's going to hit the ground. It's going to bounce back up fast. And then it's going to slow down in this position right up here. Remember, when we're looking at the value graph here, the steeper this curve is, the faster the motion that it's happening. Because this motion is happening over a short distance on the Y position, and it's very steep, it means it's going to go really fast. And so I'm going to play this back for you guys. Boom, boom. And now we've got a bouncing ball with that appropriate momentum, right? When we're animating, it's important as animators to maybe you're not a physician, you're not a physics expert. I said physician, but a physics expert, right? We don't all have like physics courses that we're going through or anything like that, but understanding how things move in real life is really important. And I've said this before, and I'm going to say it a few more times during the semester, is that making sure when you're observing things out in public, or you're observing the excuse me, the motion of something, whether it's a human or an animal or an inanimate object like a ball bouncing, that we watch how things move as far as speed and timing goes, right? And this might not be accurate. Obviously, we don't have someone bouncing the ball 100%, but we've added this physics in here with the acceleration to the ground and the deceleration on the way back up, that it sells that it's a ball bouncing versus just kind of an up and down movement of a ball that looks okay. But this fine tuning this animation makes it look a lot better. Okay. And so now we have just like a regular ball bounce. Let's say we wanted extra bounces to happen, right? We need this to bounce 4 times. And the 1 second mark seems to be pretty good timing for the ball. A 1 second bounce, right? Because right here's a half a second, right here's a full second. I'm going to not drag the layer, but I'm going to go ahead and drag and select these keyframes. And I'm just going to copy and paste them. But I want to make sure that when I'm copying and pasting them, I drag my my playhead to be on top of the last keyframe, because we don't want there to be like a stop in between there. What do I mean by that? If I were to bring my playhead over to this one, to the 1.5 second mark on the timeline and copy and paste these keyframes, right? I'm going to Control C, Control V. What's going to happen is, because between the 1 second mark and the 1.5 second keyframe, between these two, this value doesn't change. If you guys look right here at the value on the Y position, and I move the playhead over, you don't see a change happening in between there. So it's going to kind of pause at the top. So when I play it, it's going to stop. And we don't want that stop to happen. And so what we want to do is we want it to be seamless. We're going to grab these. We're going to hit Control C. We're going to click off of the keyframes. And then we're going to drag this playhead to the last keyframe over top of that one. And we're going to paste. Control V. Come on now. Do it for me. Control C, Control V. There we go. And then we're going to go over to the last keyframe at the 2 second mark, and we're going to paste again. And then we're going to go over to the keyframe over here on the 3rd second mark, and we're going to paste again. And so what that allows is just a seamless bounce to continue happening. So I'm going to play this 3, 4 bounces. So we automatically have 4. If you want to add a 5th one in because we're at 5 seconds, you can just go ahead and Control V. I'm sorry, it looks like you have to be, there we go, paste it again there. Looks like you can't click off of the keyframes in order to, because what I was doing is grabbing it and then I was clicking off and trying to paste, and it wasn't working that way. So just make sure that you're still selected on the keyframes when you're going to paste something. So now I have 5 bounces with this ball. Good. It looks good, right? But it looks kind of flat. Like the ball looks all right, but it doesn't have any character to it, right? We want to add a little character to this ball. This one here that we look at, this ball doesn't really have the character either. It's kind of it's just round the entire time. But we're going to do a little bit more of that advanced technique that I was talking about, and we're going to add some life into this ball using that squash and stretch. So I'm going to select this layer, and I'm going to duplicate the layer here. So we have a second ball. I'm going to name this one AE ball S and S for squash and stretch, right? So we have one ball that's going to be regular. I'm going to change the label color here to maybe yellow, and then we'll focus on this red ball. I'm just going to fill that one up. The red layer I'm going to select, and I'm going to hit U on my keyboard. And I'm actually going to take all these extra keyframes right now that I created, and I'm going to delete those real quick because I want to still block out this animation a little bit differently. And so I'm going to bring my playhead over to my 1 second mark, and I'm going to hit N on my keyboard to shorten the playing area, my work area. And I'm actually going to, let's keep these eased at the moment, but we might have to change the easing in a second. And what is the parameter that you guys think we will have to use in order to squash and stretch this ball. If I pull down my transform properties right here and I zoom in, which one of these do you think we will need to use to change the shape of the ball to squash and stretch? Anybody? I got crickets so far. I know the chat. I know the stream is a little behind too, so. Do 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 do. That's annoying. I'm over it. um, it is the drum roll, please. The scale. Yeah, cool. Cole got it. Yeah, sweet. Efren got it. Scale, but I did position and scale in the same layer. Yeah, you can do it. You did it on this first one. I'm gonna assume, right? Efren. Um, we're gonna just have a second ball here. Actually, what I'm gonna do with this one is I'm gonna move this over so that we can kind of see this ball over here. And actually, I can show you guys how to change the color of the ball right now, so that you can recolor this ball in order to kind of match your color palettes. And that'll help us differentiate that ball between this one and that one, just for the moment, and then we'll add the other one. So what I'm going to do is over here under effects and presets, I am going to select tint. I'm going to type in tint over here. And under color correction, there's an option that says tint. You're going to grab this and you're going to drag and drop it onto your first ball animation that we had here. And what this does is it allows you to map the black colors in your object to a different color, and then it allows you to map your white colors in your object to a different color. So if I look at the black and I'm like, okay, well, I want the black in that ball to be, we said we are going to do like a taupe kind of. Let's do like this kind of tan color. And then the white, I can maybe eyedrop this color. Ooh, this was kind of neat. Maybe maybe increase the saturation a little bit. Here. Maybe drop this down a little bit here. That looks kind of neat. Maybe even drop it more into the orange range. So it's kind of like brown. Very natural tones we're going for today. Very camouflage look, but it's all right. You guys can have vibrant pastels. I don't care. Just make sure that the colors are a consistent color palette when you're making these, right? And so I'm going to play these, right? We got the bounce going on. They're exactly the same. Now with this one, I want the squash and stretch. So the squashing of the ball is going to happen right when the ball kind of hits the ground. That's when it's going to, let me turn my camera on real quick. When the ball hits the ground, it's going to squash out. It's going to squash out this way. So it's like going to flatten, right? And then when the ball's like going back up in the air or coming down towards the ground, that ball thins out. It stretches, right? It's going to stretch like this. Think of if you were to take a ball of dough and like throw it at the ground, that ball's going to stretch, or that ball of dough is going to stretch. And then when it hits the ground, it's going to flatten out. Obviously, that ball of dough isn't going to bounce unless it were flubber. If we were using flubber, this is a great analogy, right? And then if that were to come back up, all of that squashing would bring all of it would have the momentum to come back up, stretch back out until it gets into that top position where the ball comes back to like its normal size. When you're adding squash and stretch to objects, it's important to allow the volume of the object to remain the same. Thankfully, inside of After Effects, that's pretty easy to do because we're going to use values. Like whatever we subtract from one value, we're going to add to the other value. And that allows us to remain same in the volume. That becomes trickier when you're doing frame by frame animation by hand, right? You have to consciously think, is the ball staying about the same volume, right? So even though it's changing and it's morphing shape, it still retains that same weight and volume and mass to that object. Because if you were to shrink it, that doesn't make sense in your mind. And like subconsciously, when you're watching an animation like that, you're going to be like, well, why did it get smaller when it did that? Why didn't it remain essentially the same size and just warp into a different shape? Why did the size or the mass of that object change? And so that's something really important to keep in the back of your mind, specifically when hand drawing animation. And thankfully, like I said here, it's a lot easier. So I'm going to shut my camera back off, and we are going to add that squashing here. We're going to actually start here where the ball hits the ground, and we are going to unlock our dimensions here. Okay, so when you see, it's only in the scale, there's this little chain link, and we're gonna break that chain link so that we have control over these dimensions, the X and the Y, separately. If not, when I go to move this, right, it scales this object evenly. Both of the values change at the same time. But if I unconstrain those values, I can change each one of those values separately here. And so, in fact, let's actually shoot back up to the beginning, and let's keyframe that value scale at 100, 100 at the beginning. And then we're going to scrub to the very end, and we're going to add another keyframe at the 100, 100. When you're wanting to just add a keyframe at the same value, all you got to do is click this little button right here, and it will add that keyframe at that same value for you. Or you can copy and paste it, either one. And so then we're going to bring the playhead back to the section of the animation where the ball's on the ground. And we're going to stretch this ball out this way. So we're not going to do anything too crazy. Let's do 120. And because we added 20 to this value, it was 100, we added 20%. We're going to deduct 20% from the Y value here. So we're going to drop this value down to 80, right? And so that squashes that ball. So now if we look at it, this ball is kind of squashing, and then it's hitting the ground at the full squash, and then it's coming back up. But what you notice here, right, is when we start at the beginning and we go down, as we're going down, that ball is starting to squash up here. Well, that doesn't make sense, right? We need to stretch the ball out right here. And so working backwards, which you do a lot in animation, specifically when you're working in After Effects or in Cinema 4D, any of these softwares that does the kind of tweening for you, it's beneficial to work backwards sometimes. And so we're going to move back a couple free keyframes. In fact, if you want to move back one keyframe at a time, if you're selected in your timeline down here and you hit Control and you arrow back or forth, it will just move the playhead one keyframe ahead or backwards. It doesn't matter, left or right, whatever arrow you push, it will move that way. And so let's move let's go 2 to 3 let's go 3 keyframes back. So 1, 2, 3, and let's change the value here so that it's kind of opposite of what we did here, right? We did 120 by 80, but let's do 80 by 120. So we're having a similar stretching happening. Like the values are very similar, right? And so not only is it going to stretch there, but it's going to also stretch when it comes back up, right? So we're going to go back to that center where that squash happens, and we're going to move 1, 2, 3 keyframes forward, and we're going to hit Control C with this keyframe selected, Control C, Control V. So we have equal distance. So it's not only going to come down and it's going to squash down, and then it's going to stretch on its way back up. And you can see by adding in just a little squash and stretch, that it gives this ball a lot more character than this one right here, right? This one looks very hard and rigid, as if you were gonna throw like a really blown up, like super full of air basketball to the ground, where this one looks like it's, it's flexible. Um, it's got fluidity to the ball. It's softer, right? And this looks okay. This isn't bad. Obviously, we need to change the keyframes because these are linear keyframes. But I kind of want, when this ball is coming down to the ground, maybe I want to move in, because we've blacked out the squashing and stretching. Let's maybe move these beginning keyframes in a little bit so the timing of that squashing and stretching changes, right? So if I bring, let's see, 1, 2, let's just do 2 keyframes in where we start at 100 value. And then I'm going to go to the end of our animation, and I'm going to go backwards 2 keyframes. I'm going to just select this last keyframe on the scale and drag that in. So basically what's going to happen is when the ball's at the peak of the height of the bounce, it's going to be 100% scale. There's going to be no squash and stretch happening. And then after it starts to go down is when that squashing and stretching is happening. So because when it's up at the top, nothing's happening. It's not moving anywhere. So it doesn't need to start squashing until a couple frames after, when it starts to move backwards, right? And so when I play this, it just makes it look a little bit, it's very subtle, but it just makes it look a little bit more interesting, right? Now I am going to Control S to save my work, because I've got quite a few things, I've already done quite a bit of work here. And the other thing I think that we could do to make this ball look even more squishy, is we could actually, let's do, before we get to that part, let's ease these keyframes, these squash and stretch keyframes here. So I'm going to select them, and I'm going to hit F9 on my keyboard, and then we're going to jump into our graph editor here. Now, when we look at the graph editor here, this looks very kind of crazy, right? Because of the way the values of the squashing and stretching are changing during, like, over time, right? They're changing percentage values. So this isn't pixels, we're in percentage now, right? And that percentage is changing as the ball's dropping to the ground and then coming back up. And so we just kind of want to take this and maybe smooth these out a little bit. It doesn't have to be anything too crazy, but I'm just going to grab all of these keyframes. In fact, I'm going to select the entire, I'm just going to drag here, select them all. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so we can see them a little bit further apart, so we see this graph a little bit bigger for us. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to exaggerate these curves a little bit. I'm going to hold down Shift, and when you've got all of the keyframes selected and you just grab one of these Bezier handles, it will move them equal distance, so you don't have to guess, right? So I'm just going to hold down Shift. I'm going to drag these out a little bit, and then I'm going to grab these ones, holding down Shift, and drag these out a little bit. And then I'm going to do the same for the X value, okay? Because I just did that for the Y value, the green line. But we want to do that for the X line as well. So I'm just going to grab this Bezier handle right here is the, this one right here is the X. You can, if you just, I'm sorry, I'm grabbing the, not the Bezier handle, but the graph itself. If you just grab this and start moving this around, you can see which one you're selected on. And then you hold down Shift, and I'm just going to drag that out. And then I'm going to do the same this way, right? So I'm going to grab this one at the bottom. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm just going to drag that out. So now we have like this really smooth squashing and stretching that's going to happen over the time that it is happening from the beginning of the bounce to the end. So I'm going to play that. And it just looks a little bit more exaggerated, right? It just looks a little bit more fluid and a little bit faster than before when they were just linear keyframes. I know if we were to go to the, let's look at the speed graph on this. Let's see what the speed graph looks like. So the speed graph is, I mean, it's relatively the same as far as like kind of confusing looking, right? Because the speed of the squashing and stretching over the Y value, the green, the speed of the squashing and stretching over the X value right here. So if you work in either one of these, it would be okay. You would just grab, you could grab all of the keyframes again, grabbing them all like this, making sure you click and drag over the entire thing. And then you can just grab these little bars here and drag these in and out to see what it would look like at different speed like angles here. I think this might look a little bit funny actually. I'm just grabbing these different Bezier handles and exaggerating these out a little bit more. That kind of actually makes it look a little bit more fluid. So you can work with this one, specifically the scale. You can either work in the speed graph or the value graph. Either one looks, I think the value graph is a little bit easier to grab these Bezier handles and just kind of drag them out. But you just want to make sure these look like nice, smooth curves, right? We don't want them to be jaggedy, especially if you're in the value graph specifically. You want these to be nice and smooth looking and not really tight and bunched up, versus looking in the speed graph where you kind of want these to go at little peaks right up here. So it kind of just depends. This area is not such a big deal because this is where like these little sections that look kind of like little mouths open. This is where the value is essentially like the same 100, 100, and then it's finally stretching. This is the stretch that occurs. These are the squashing keyframes that occur. And so if you're just comparing, looking up here while you're messing around with the graph editor down here, you should be okay. Now, you said you don't have the handles, Efren. Are you in the speed graph or are you in the value graph? I am going to, let's look at the position speed graph real quick. So when we were in the value graph, right, our value graph, this is why working in the value graph with the ball bounce is beneficial, because it actually looks like an upside down bounce, right? You can see that the ball, as it goes to the ground, it speeds up because this is a very steep incline, and then because this is another one, it's going to slow down as it's going into this last value. So this one's a little bit easier to visualize versus the speed graph. If you look up here and you're looking at this, you're like, oh wow, why does it go down into the negatives? And that's because the ball is going up at that point. So it's starting at the value, the Y value up at the top. And then as you go along in time, right, the value on your Y position changes the speed of this ball. It goes slow, speed up really fast right up here until it gets to that bounce. So you can kind of see it right here. I just think it's a little easier to see on the value graph, the speed specifically with the ball, versus this one's a little bit more confusing, which is funny because this is the speed graph, but for some reason the value graph with the bounce just looks like you can tell the speed faster. You're in the speed graph. Okay. And are you looking at the scale or are you looking at the position? If you're in the speed graph and you're looking at the scale, the Bezier handles are not at the top of the curves. They're at the middle part of the curves. So you can see these little squares, like this one right there, this one right here, this one right here. These are, okay, so you're in the position value. But these are your keyframes. And so when you're in the speed graph, if you grab these like this, and then you can move those around that way. In the position one, you're saying that you're grabbing the keyframes. So let's select all the keyframes. And you might get them for some of them. Let's see. I'm still able to get this. Are your keyframes eased? Do you have easing on them? So if I go back to my dope sheet, do your keyframes look like these guys, like the hourglasses? If they don't, I would, you have to ease those. If they do look like this, I would just go back to the graph editor over here and I would just select those keyframes again and hit this little button down here, which also allows you to ease your keyframes. And that one might just reset it for you and allow you to have those Bezier handles. Let me know if that works for you, if you have to kind of redo that. And then I'll just kind of keep an eye on the chat and we can jump back into that if we need to. But yeah, so now when I play this, it's got this more of like this boingy type of like cartoony squashing and stretching happening. But this is good. We can make it better. I'm going to duplicate this again. Some of them do and some of them don't. Try working in your value graph then. If you're having issues inside of the speed graph with your position, just change to the value graph here and try it this way. And you'll be able to grab the Bezier handles. You have to make sure that all of your keyframes are eased though, because if for some reason, if your keyframes where the ball is up in the air are linear keyframes, they will not show Bezier handles. So all of the keyframes have to be eased in order to get these Bezier handles. For instance, if I go here and I grab this one and I turn this one back into a linear keyframe by clicking this one. Let's see. This one. Notice that all of a sudden, first of all, my curve changes, right? But if I go to select this, it doesn't allow me to change a Bezier handle. It only gives me a Bezier handle up at the top here because this keyframe where the ball is at the bottom of the bounce is eased. But because this one's linear, it doesn't give me that option. So I can't even click on it and change the curves. So I'm just going to undo that real quick. Let me duplicate this ball. And I'm going to move this one over with the X position. I'm going to move this one over this way. And with this, let's change this one to yellow so we know not to use this one. And squash and stretch 2 is okay because we already have squash and stretch applied. But I'm going to hit U on my keyboard. And let's make this so that the ball, this one right here, in fact, we will apply this tint effect. If I just come up, you can copy and paste effects from one layer to the other. So if I go into that first layer here and I take this tint and I select it and I hit Control C, and then I go to the second ball that I just made and I hit I select up here into the effects controls and hit Control V, it will just paste that effect here to the other layer. So just a quick tip for you guys to know. You'll see me doing that often just because it saves time. But what if I wanted this ball, now we're still on the white ball here, the one in the center, to kind of stick to the ground when that squash and stretch happens? Well, that's pretty easy to actually do now that we have everything kind of blocked out. We can just essentially adjust this keyframe right here when the ball hits the ground. And so what we can do is we can move this over. We can either match it up right here, or what we can do is maybe move it in one keyframe so it's a little offset. And we're actually going to copy this keyframe and we're going to do the same thing on the other side because it's identical. It's mirrored from one side to the other. With this animation, it's looping. So one side is the same to the other. And I'm just going to paste that here. So in this section right here, the ball should stay flat on the ground, right? And so let's go into the position and we're going to update the right here. So we're in the value graph, right? And what's happening is when this curve goes, it's, rounded here, it means that it is changing. We're in the value graph again. Okay. You can tell by seeing like what is up here, or down at the bottom, you can just see. And also the value graph, unless you're going into negatives, it will show just positive values usually on the side. But when there's, oh, sorry guys. When there's any kind of changes, you're going to have a curve. When there's no change happening, it should be a straight line, right? That means there's nothing happening in that spot. If I were to hit the position here, right, and I were to grab the X position, because we're not changing on the X value at all, it's a straight line across our graph. And so I'm going to grab this X position here. And when this ball is on the ground stretching, I want it to be just stay on the ground, because right now it's kind of bouncing up off that ground and we don't want that to happen. So I'm going to grab these keyframes here and I'm just going to, one at a time. You want to grab one at a time. And I'm going to take this Bezier handle and I'm just going to kind of move it tight in there. And I'm going to do this one same too. I'm going to move that nice and tight in here. So we have a nice straight line happening across. So now the ball is going to bounce. It's going to hit the ground. It's going to stay on the ground for a second and squash. And then it's going to bounce back up. That momentum's going to build and it's going to bounce that ball back up into the air. So now if I play this one, it looks much squash. It looks like much more malleable and much squishier than this one that we have over here. That's kind of bouncing and hitting the ground. Let me kind of cover some of these up. Let me do this real quick. So when you're comparing, first of all, when you're comparing any of them to this one right here, they all look much better because this ball looks rigid and just kind of boring, right? So we're going to delete that ball. We don't need that ball. Get out of here. Goodbye. But when you're comparing these two together, this one looks okay. It's not bad, right? But this one just looks like it has a little bit more character because it's just squashing onto that ground. It's staying on that ground for just a split second, right? Because if you look here, it's really only staying on the ground for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 keyframes. And then it starts to go right back up into the air. So, I mean, 5 keyframes, if you're looking here, that's like what? Like a fraction? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, almost like a sixth of a second happening. So it's a very fraction of a second that it's staying on the ground. But that fraction of a second, that small little detail that you add into your animations can really just add more appeal to it, right? And it can really add a lot of character into your elements, no matter what you're animating, even if it is just a ball. And so I encourage you guys to kind of do all three to look at the difference and, study the difference. But this ball, this one in the center, is the ball that we ultimately want. And so I'm just going to take this tint. I'm going to select I'm going to select this ball right here. And I'm just going to grab this tint effect and I'm going to hit Control C and then I'm going to paste it to my finalized ball right there. And then I'm just going to delete this ball because I don't need it anymore, right? And I'm going to save my project here. And so now if I select this and hit U, you're going to see both position keyframes and scale keyframes. This can get very daunting kind of quickly, right? Because everything looks the same. What's really cool is that After Effects recently, like within an update within the last year, has added the option to kind of color change your keyframes so you can tell the difference between them right away. And I like to do this sometimes when a layer has a lot of keyframes on it. And so I'm just gonna, if you go over here and you select the scale property over in the layer panel right over here, it selects all of your keyframes for you. And so I'm just going to right click and I'm going to go to label and I'm just going to change this color, I don't know, to blue. Okay. So I know all my scale keyframes are blue. And then I'm going to select all of my position keyframes and I'm going to change that one to, let's do pink for that one. Right. So now all my position keyframes are pink and my scale keyframes are blue. Words are hard. Now, another thing that we can add, and this one can, this effect that we can easily tack onto an animation can add the nuance of speed more. It can add like the effect of having more speed onto your animation at the cost of a very heavy computer work. Like it takes the computer a lot of energy to make this effect work. And so when you're doing your animations, it's good to block them out and have them animate like this, and then add this effect at the very end before you're going to export it out, because it's going to take forever, and it's going to affect the way that your playback is happening when you're playing your animations. And so that is called motion blur. What is motion blur? Motion blur is the effect that you see on cameras or video when the object is moving really fast and it looks blurry. In fact, that's why we use those animation smears. That's why we distort the objects during hand-drawn animation, is to give the effect of motion blur. But what's cool is that in the programs like After Effects and Cinema 4D, you can add that with just a click of a button instead of manually having to put that in. Hang on, how do you get to the Bezier curves? You go to your graph editor, which is right here, right? If you select, I'll select my position property, and I'm going to click the graph editor. This area right here, when you can see all your keyframes like this is called your dope sheet view. And then when you go into here, this is your graph editor mode. If you want to increase the size of the graph editor, you just come down like you would in the regular time, like in the dope sheet view. If you want to change how detailed you are in your timeline on your frames, you can use that same button down here to kind of zoom into your curves, right? And I am on the value graph specifically for this curve right here. And you make sure that when you want to grab these to get those Bezier handles, you click off, and you click off of the lines, right? And you click and drag to create like this selection box around all of the keyframes. Because when I'm not selected on here, all of these little tiny boxes that you see in your graphs, these are keyframes. That's where we threw down keyframes in the dope sheet view, right? So if I were to put my thing here, if I were to put my playhead right here and then switch to dope sheet view, it's going to be right on top of a keyframe, right on top of that position keyframe. So I'm going to switch over here, and you can just grab a short selection if you want to. You can grab one if you want to, or you can grab all of them if you want to. But in order to have these curves, you have to have all of your keyframes. You have to have the keyframes eased. Like I said before, if I were to grab these two right here and I were to turn them back into linear keyframes, I no longer have the option of the Bezier handles to change that curve. So I have to make sure that those are that those keyframes are eased, right? I have to turn that easy ease on to those keyframes in order to get that. So back to motion blur. So for instance, how can we see motion blur in real life? If you take your hand and you just move it super fast and it looks really blurry, that's motion blur, right? You can't pick out specific fingers or where they're at. That's motion blur. And it creates like this fast moving, it creates the sense that something is moving very quickly, because we just associate it to what we see in real life. When you look at cars flying by, they're not super sharp and crisp. They're a little bit blurry, versus if one's like driving like your granny's in the car and she's like strolling down the street and you can like run faster than the car. It's probably not going to have motion blur on it. But you know what might is the wheels, but the car itself wouldn't. Well, there's a couple different ways to add motion blur, but the quick way is going to be on the layer itself. So in your template right now, these little options right here are like turning on. Here, let me go back here. They're like on-off switches. So like when we go into the graph editor, this turns blue to show that we're in the graph editor. If I wanted to shy my layers, right, just to make sure I'm not seeing them here on there, I would click this button and turn it blue. And then I would turn the shy. I would click these little shy guys right here on each layer that I didn't want to show up. Well, This one right here is motion blur. In the template, it's automatically activated, but if you guys don't use the template, this will not be on. You want to make sure that you turn this on. So if I click it off, it's off right now. Turn it on, it's on. But it's not on my layer yet, right? So when I was saying before, it's just on in the composition, right? But it's not actually on the ball. It's easier to explain like this. Like I turn this little shy guy on and nothing happens to my layers, but as soon as I click the little shy guy on each layer, it hides that layer for me. And then if I want to find those layers again, I just turn this little shy guy off and it shows me those layers, right? And so then I can turn this off if I want to see that layer consistently or not. This is a good practice to use if you guys have a lot of layers in here, which eventually you will get to that point. But for right now, I mean, there's only going to be like a few layers in each one of your projects. So you're not going to really have to worry about that section right away. But so that concept still applies here to the motion blur, right? It's on, but it's not on the ball layer yet. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that we turn it on right here on the ball layer. So I'm just going to click that little area there. And now look, if you look all of a sudden at the ball, it's a little bit blurry because it's starting to add that motion blur. So now when I play it, it's sharp up here. And then as soon as it's going to start to move and pick up speed, it's going to blur out a little bit. Bloom, a little bit blurry. And then if I pause it right there, here's where you're really going to get a sense of, let me fit this into my screen here. This is where you're going to get the sense of the motion blur right there. That's a motion blur on. This is a motion blur off. On, off, on, off, right? If I play it when it's off, it looks good. If I play it when it's on, it looks a little bit faster and smoother, right? It's these little things, little details. So being an animator is like not only, it's like a combination of many things, right? You have to be patient because animation takes a long time and you're not going to get things right away, especially if you haven't done it before. Patience is key to be an animator. You have to be able to think outside of the box and you have to be able to problem solve, right? Coming up with solutions to problems that you, excuse me, I'm so sorry, but that you encounter in trying to figure out maybe a way around those problems. That kind of stuff that comes a little bit later, but that's really important to learn when you're animating. Being able to understand how things move. Again, back to that whole physics thing. You don't have to be a physics professor to understand, but you do have to just kind of understand innately how motion happens, right? And then what was I getting at to being a good animator? Detail oriented and organized. Those two things are key too. It's kind of like when I know I have a lot of illustrators in this class. I've seen your guys' illustrations. You guys do some really impressive work, right? But you don't just draw something and then you're starting with like shading and highlights and all those things right away. You don't do that. You start with a sketch, then you block out the color, and then you go in and you start to add detail like shadows and maybe highlights. And then you start to go in and start really fine tuning textures and stuff. So there's a process that goes along with illustrating. That same process comes along with animation. We block out our animation and then we get in there and do the fine details of things, right? And then we move things around. What looks good? What doesn't look good? Why isn't this looking right? Why is it not looking right? Like, where in the process did it start to go wrong? Right? So if you're animating the ball and you start with the bounce, the up and down, and it looks good, right? And then you move on to the squash and stretch, and then all of a sudden something starts to look weird. And you're like, okay, well, where did the problem occur? It occurred somewhere between when I finished the position animation of my object and I started the squash and stretch. So you need to look at where in the squash and stretch did I do something wrong, right? And so thinking analytically about how you can break down these processes is really important and kind of doing things step by step, one thing at a time, not just jumping in and doing the scale and the position at the same time, but blocking out the animation for the position, getting that right, then moving on to your squash and stretch and getting that right. It'll help you when you start to make mistakes, because you will. It's normal. It's okay. You'll start to make mistakes, and then you're like, okay, well, where in the process did that mistake occur? Doing things step by step like this will help you to kind of um mitigate those issues that you end up with. Heck, you may even need models before sketching. And yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, motion, being able to capture the motion of a model, a human model. In fact, for I took life drawing classes, which really helped me to understand arcs and angles, right? We talked about that being a principle of animation. Understanding how the body moves, understanding how people can tort their bodies and can sit in different ways, and how flesh moves across the bones and muscle moves across the bones, and how things interact. It's those details that you start to think of when you get comfortable with the process and you start to delve deeper into that rabbit hole, right? We're in the very beginning, but it's important to start at the beginning and start slow until we can get to those places. And I know you guys can get this done, right? And I want you to practice with this over the next day. Try with the After Effects ball. And then when we come into class on um, Thursday, we're going to do the Cinema 4D ball and then the Adobe Animate ball. And then I wanted to get this thing. I think I'll do this for extra credit. Okay. So over the weekend, I drew for you guys a like kind of course where the ball could bounce through, right? So I created this for you guys, and I put this, you'll notice, look how many layers this has, right? These are all the different shape layers that I have here in this illustration. And so I have my color palette laid out at the top as like its own composition that I can move around, and I can just turn off when I'm done. So I can change the colors as needed. But I have all of these different layers here. Let me kind of do this. That I can select. When I select these layers, you can see them highlighting up there, right? And I have control over every single pretty much aspect of these animations, right? And the ball, I want you guys to, and I've kind of blocked it out. I haven't finished it all the way, but the ball's going to hit, bounce, and then disappear into like a portal area, right? Okay, Logan, I can see that. I can see my thing is. I'm still here. I'm still here, you guys. Let me know when it stopped freezing. And I'll go over this. But this, I think that this is a great way to apply that bouncing ball, because I think this is a little outdated. It's important to understand, right? Because we're working with just the Y position with the balls bouncing, which is great. But this one gets a little bit more complex because the ball is moving all over the place. And we have the opportunity to animate different things within this entire illustration, right? It's a completed illustration versus just a ball bouncing. And so I think that we will either touch base on this. I don't know if we'll have time for it on Thursday. This might be a Tuesday thing and something that you guys can do for extra credit. But I think that this, when it would be completed, would be much better for a portfolio versus this. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this. This shows skills and stuff, but this one right here is just a more polished looking illustration and kind of gives a purpose to the bouncing ball versus this one, which is just a regular bouncing balls, which are fine. And so, but I really want to teach you guys how to use Cinema 4D with that in Adobe Animate before we get to this area, right? But what will happen is when this one animates, notice that I had started this. Not too big of a deal. I can still hear and see the stream. Okay, cool. Um, but you know, when this ball comes down here and it hits this first panel, the panel I have changing color. So the panel changes color right away. I would finish that up for each one of these. And then also I had plans to make these kind of compress down when the ball hits it, like the and it'll happen kind of in a sequence. So almost like if you were to take a slinky and fold it down, or like a piece of paper accordion, like an accordion. That's a great example. If I were to hold one end of an accordion and kind of go like this, right? I kind of wanted that effect to happen right here, possibly happening right here as well. And so when the ball hits like this thing, like these compress down, I wanted to add some kind of like little portal into here where the ball could disappear into, and kind of just make it more of a completed look for you guys. But if you notice, this is a large composition. If I hit Control K right now, it's 1920 by 2160. So I doubled that 1080 resolution here, so that, because I'm thinking ahead, I am going to essentially put this into a 1920 by 1080 composition and animate the motion of this entire big composition to look like a camera's following the ball down as it moves down the rest of the comp. It sounds very complicated. We might get to this a little bit later. This might be like an extra thing that I have to record and do separately, but I'm trying to work in a little bit more of newer projects throughout this semester. And so that might be one that we maybe do next week if you guys want to. Other than that, like I said, for the project, let me go back to here. Starting the due date range is going to be Monday, February 5th through February 12th. If you get it in between that date range that week, you will not be docked points. And it, like, even if it shows up late, that's okay. Don't worry about it. You'll know if it's actually late because the assignment will lock, right? And if you're writing, like I said before, if you're writing me to be like, hey, can I turn this project in? Then it's late, then you get points marked off, right? But you guys can start working on the After Effects ball right here. And then if you guys want to start to move ahead and look at the Cinema 4D ball and the Adobe Animate ball, you guys can start doing that. But we are going to go over those on Thursday's class, right? And then we're going to learn to composite them all together. But if you did need to move ahead for any reason, you can watch the videos right here. If you just click on these, they should still be, yep, perfect. Past classes a year ago streamed for that one. And then this one might be a little bit longer. This was Dr. Casey Farina who used to teach this class, and he did this one, so this one would be his. And then this one is how to composite everything together. So if you guys want to get a little bit ahead, you can, but it's still really good to follow along in class. Yeah, sweet. Awesome. Do you guys have any questions before I end the live stream? I hope you guys are having fun. I hope you guys are enjoying this class so far. Give me like some kind of sign that you guys are enjoying class, because I want you guys to have fun in this class and feel like you're getting what you need out of it, right? Like, animation is going to be hard, but it should still be fun. And so I want to know that you guys are like enjoying it. So positive feedback helps me to know that you guys are liking the projects and not really getting too lost. It helps me to maybe figure out where my teaching can be adjusted to adapt to the style that you guys need. But if you guys do get started on this and you have it fully animated, just make sure that you save your project, right? And that it's that you guys start to get used to here. I know Maria was asking before. What I have here, Maria, is a folder for GCC, and then inside this folder is this yeah, I'm not surprised about that. You want to make some meme stuff with us? Yeah, I can see that, Evan. Yeah, but that's exactly like, I mean, you look at all the stuff that you see on on TikTok and Instagram and all this stuff, and you realize like, hey, I can start to make these things by myself. Sweet. Brian's having fun. Awesome. Cool. I guess you could say. Yeah, minus all the stuff we had to go through today with all the lagging and crap. I'm really sorry. You're having a ball. Get. You guys are coming strong with the dad jokes. I should have something that I can replay up here on my live stream that, like, whenever you say dad jokes, I can just be like, it's like Homer Simpson that pops up on screen. He's like, dope. Just like, you guys make me feel like I'm having a fun night. So that's great. But yeah, back to like the folder thing, creating like a class folder and just having like this template folder in there. You guys won't have this test project folder, but having the template one and then your first project right here is a good idea. Even if we have to follow our guidelines for this project and future works, do we have to make extra appeal that you presented? For example, do we have to have the squash the way you did it, or can we do it like your own way? I would as long as it's like looks good, you guys can like change the squash and stretch values a little bit more. I'm okay with that. I would stay within the guidelines that I give you, but you guys can maybe change the values a little bit so that they're different, right? Like you don't have to have the same exact color scheme that I do. You guys don't have to have the same exact values that I input necessarily. Like, I know I did only 20%, but if you want to go to 30%, go ahead. But if you start getting beyond that and it start looking like insane, then I would dial it back down a bit. That's another thing with just designers in general, is learning when to edit your work back, right? Learning like, hey, maybe I've gone a little too far. I need to reel it in a little bit. Or like maybe I'm not pushing the boundaries enough. So finding those lines where you can blur and kind of be creative within, that's important too. So you can do that. Sweet. Efren, if you're done with the After Effects version, that's awesome. Then you're ready to go. Yeah, it's pretty quick actually. It's very simple animation. So if you watch the Efren, if you watch the compositing video on the module, and you render that out, you can share it in the or in the Discord channel if you want to. If you just watch that video, watch this one on how to essentially render everything out. You can skip the whole part where everything is like where you're combining all three of the bouncing balls together, because we haven't gotten that far, but you can just export the one bouncing ball and put that in the Discord if you want to show off your work. Cool. I'm happy you guys are enjoying it. All right, class, I'm going to let you guys go. Thanks for sticking with me. I know it was a tough live stream and we had a little bit of issues, but y'all stayed locked and loaded. It's like getting stuck on a roller coaster. It's a pain in the ass. Yeah, cool. Sweet. Awesome, my friend. All right, guys, you guys have a good night. Enjoy your Wednesday. Get some sleep. Review your notes. You'll be cool. Bye, Eric. Oh yeah, Eric. Also, write me if you call the thing tomorrow and you can't figure that out, and we'll talk. Okay. All right, guys. Bye.